We've talked about this and debated this quite a bit. What is the true nature of Antonio and Bassanio's relationship? Everyone has their different opinions when reading the play. The text could be used to argue both sides quite effectively. Although when we look at Shakespeare himself and some of his other works, it could be used to argue that Antonio and Bassanio were actually more than friends. Now I have to do a disclaimer before I keep going. This play was written back in the 1590s. To say at that time period was not quite well documented would be a gross understatement. Our knowledge of this era is quite limited. All of what we know about William Shakespeare is from very scant records, interpretations of his writing, and lots of speculation. As much of us know, Shakespeare was married to Anne Hathaway, although there is, however, evidence that their marriage was quite rocky. In Shakespeare's will, after he died, he states, "Item to my wife, the second best bed." It is also known that Shakespeare was not exactly loyal to his wife when he was living in London, but whether or not these love affairs were solely with women is an ongoing debate. Now, relationships between two men in those days was not completely uncommon. What made it different from today, however, was in the 1500s, these relationships were much more casual. If a man had a sexual relationship with another man, this did not become a part of the man's identity, like it does today. These men did not identify themselves as homosexuals. Shakespeare was thought to be involved with a man we know as Fair Youth. Nobody knows much about him other than his initials were W.H. There's a long list of people who could be Shakespeare's fair youths, one of whom is pictured here. Shakespeare addressed the first of his 126 sonnets to this man, Fair Youth. Now, how do we know that these sonnets were written about a man? In the sonnet shown here, Sonnet 20, Shakespeare clearly shows us that this person he was writing to is a man. First, there are lines such as, "For woman wert thou first created," telling us that this person was a man created for a woman. There are other lines such as, "A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false woman's fashion, an eye more bright than theirs, less false and rolling." Shakespeare is comparing the person he's writing about to a woman, thus telling us that the person is not actually a woman. There are other lines in the sonnet, such as, "Mine be thy love." These few words can be interpreted as Shakespeare's proclamation of love to the mystery man he is writing this sonnet to. So what does Shakespeare's love life have to do with Antonio and Bassanio's relationship? Shakespeare might not have been as hesitated to write a relationship between two men if he were in a loving relationship with another man. The subject would not have been as much of a taboo for him. There is a tendency for poets to write based off their own emotions and experiences, thus telling us that Shakespeare might have very well been in a homosexual relationship. But it wasn't just Antonio and Bassanio whose relationship was in question, but also Romeo and Mercutio. There are few people who believe Mercutio's feelings towards Romeo go further than friendship, the way he constantly puts down Romeo when he talks about his love for Rosaline. There's also the scene in which he fatally fights Tybalt when Romeo doesn't, showing he is willing to fight Romeo's battles. This is some people's interpretation of the book, but not everybody's. In the most recent film adaptation of Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio, Mercutio is shown dressed up in drag when they go off to the dance in the beginning of the play, showing that this director's interpretation of Mercutio's character is one of a homosexual character. Another play that has two friends whose relationship is seen by some as romantic is Hamlet. Horatio and Hamlet are also friends whose feelings some believe extend more than friendship, especially Horatio's feelings towards Hamlet. Now, I have never read Hamlet, but when I read the following passage said by Hamlet on his deathbed to Horatio, I could not help but draw parallels to Antonio Bassanio. Lines such as, "If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart," and Hamlet asking for Horatio to be, quote, "absent from felicity for a while," unquote, after his death, really struck me as maybe suggesting a more romantic relationship. The main reason for this interpretation is, as I said before, the similarities between Antonio's speech to Bassanio, on Antonio's last moments of life. Just as Horatio held Hamlet in his heart, Antonio loved Bassanio, holding Bassanio in his heart. And just as Hamlet asked Horatio to tell his story, Antonio asked Bassanio to tell of his story and his love for Bassanio to others. While we can never know what Shakespeare intended when he wrote Merchant of Venice, we can have our own interpretations, and I think it is useful to look at Shakespeare's personal life and his other works to help us reach our own conclusions.